Here we go, start of the Étape. Hopefully I can survive and make it to the end. I did it. This will be a bit of a debrief video following the Étape du Tour. I got some pretty cool footage, but I didn't film as much as I would like to have because it was just good to be in the moment, and it was also the hardest thing I've ever done, so there was a lot of suffering involved. But to be honest, it was absolutely incredible. Some stuff went really well for me and other parts not so well. Before we get into that and my experience, there were 3 major climbs on the day, and the total elevation added up to 4,700 meters of climbing over 170k distance. Now, usually I have some sort of goal or target with an event like this, but because of these climbs and the ones involved in this, I really didn't know what to expect because they were unlike anything I've done before. They just go on for so long and there's such steep gradients. So I simply wanted to finish it and not get swept up by the broom wagon, and also finish in one piece. Now, I did see the broom wagon a couple of times, but it's just an insane stage with some iconic climbs and some killer views, as you might have seen by watching stage 12 of the Tour de France on TV. Now, let me know if you did watch it. It was pretty epic, and some of that descending was mental. But now, how did I do? So from the start, it basically went into the first climb with a steady uphill towards that, and then it was into the Cols du Galibier, which is 23 Ks at 5.1%, taking us to 2,600 meters above sea level. And this was actually awesome. It felt pretty comfortable for me, and it felt like I was pacing it really well. It felt pretty easy, but that's probably because it was fairly gradual. There wasn't too much that was over or under the average gradient. So it was pretty consistent, which made a huge difference to how easy it was. I was able to keep my heart rate consistent, and I just kept plodding on without doing too much damage to the legs. And the views were insane. It was so cool to be riding on closed roads with so many other riders and seeing all the stunning scenery. So this section went well for me, and getting to the top felt great since I wasn't dying, but I'd already ticked off one of the huge, big 3 climbs in this race. So I felt absolutely buzzing at this point. It was so nice, and I think it went well because of how consistent that gradient is and how well I managed to pace it. At the top, I chucked on some arm warmers and a gilet ready for the descent because it was fairly early and we were up quite high at this point, which was probably the right thing to do. I would have been a bit too cold otherwise if I hadn't put them on going down. Now, the plan was to take it fairly easy on the descents, particularly on this one, as there was a couple of more technical sections towards the top, and the main goal was to complete this, but also come back in one piece. There's so much that can go wrong with such a long event and so many other riders taking on such a challenging pro course. So it's all well and good trying to get the fastest possible time and bombing it downhill. But I wanted to complete this, and I'm not competing as a pro. I'm not getting paid to do this. So it's no good for me if I crash out. So the descent was really nice. In the middle of it, we had a little bit of a climb, which was the Col de Telegraph, and we reached the bottom having done 85 Ks already. Then it was time for what was possibly the hardest bit for me, and the bit that sapped the energy the most from my legs, and that was the Croix de Fer climb. It was massively deceptive since it was shown as 29k, an average of 5.2%, which seems very similar to the Galibier, which I'd done, and that felt completely different. Now, this climb kind of has 3 separate climbs within it, and it also has some descending in it. So the average gets impacted by that, and there's actually some fairly long sections that are much steeper and much harder than that 5.2%. So it was really tough, and if you take away the descent bits and the flat bits within this climb, then the average is significantly higher, and that's why it was quite deceptive, and I found it really tough. And it was somewhere around this climb where I wasn't taking in enough water or salts for how hot it was. It was super hot, and I started to cramp up a bit towards the top, which is never good when you know you've got so much to do and you've also got to climb Alpe d'Huez at the end to finish on. Anyway, I make it to the top, and I've probably never been so hot in my life. The average temperature was around 32 degrees, but just climbing directly in that sun with no real breeze was insane. I just felt super, super hot, and I was definitely sweating loads and getting rid of a lot of fluids and a lot of salts. So coming to the top of this climb, we done about 113k, and I was desperate for some fluids and some salts and a nice long descent to recover. So the plan was to take it as easy as possible on the descent and make it to the feed station and the water station without cramping up or putting too many watts through the legs. But unfortunately, the descent was also fairly deceptive, having two shortish and steepish climbs in it that I couldn't simply take it easy on. I had to put out a level of power just to keep going, which was quite tough, and I was concerned a bit about the cramping. But I got to the bottom, I got some fluids in, and I got a gel in, which was awesome. I was super relieved at this point. And then now we have a flat section with a bit of a headwind and a crosswind to the bottom of the final iconic climb, Alpe d'Huez, in the heat with a bit of cramp and the broom wagon catching up at this point. But I'd also hit another problem on the descent, although I hadn't realized it. I had a bit of a mechanical. My front brake was making a lot of noise, and I thought something was just caught in there and eventually it would come out. But it turns out the piston that holds the pads in against the disc brake had come right out and basically was keeping my front brake slightly on the entire time, which wasn't too much of a problem on the descent, although it did burn through my brake pads. But then on the flat, I could really start to feel my front brake was essentially on, and it felt much harder than it should have done. I basically had, up until this point, 4 sachets of beta fuel, which is around 80 grams of carbs each, 4 gels and a small amount of food, and I also had some salt tablets. Now, the problem with the salt tablets is I needed to take one every 15 minutes or so, and they were in a little kind of Ziploc type sachet kind of thing in my back pocket. So it was just difficult to access them and impossible to take on any kind of salts during the descents, which is definitely something to learn from. And next time I'll get some dissolvable ones that I can just put in the water, and then it's just easy for me to drink it. So they're fine for things like running or short triathlons, but just weren't ideal for this because I couldn't take on salts kind of frequently as I would have liked to and as I should have been doing. Now I get to the bottom of the Alpe, and there was a big feed station and a mechanical tent. So I thought about getting them to have a look at my front brake, but they were already working on some other bikes. There was a little bit of a queue, and I heard the broom wagon was coming up. So I had to make a decision here, and I just chose to go for it and push on with the final climb, Alpe d'Huez. I'd completed over 150 Ks at this point, so it didn't seem like I had much left. And I've done the Alpe on Zwift numerous times, but the gradients just felt so much steeper, the hairpins felt so much longer, and it took me absolutely ages. I kept having to slow up on the verge of cramp, and I didn't want my legs to fully lock out at any point, so I kind of had to stop at a few points. And the brake being on just didn't help either mentally, and I'm sure I was losing some watts as well. And it was just an absolute war zone with bodies everywhere on Alpe d'Huez and people just pushing their bikes. And about halfway up, I could see the broom wagon behind me, about 3 hairpins down or so below. And I just wanted to make sure I made the cutoff time. So I kept pushing towards the top, trying to stay away from the broom wagon. And I eventually made it up there. And then there was about a flattish 2 Ks or so to the finish line, and then across the line before the broom wagon, thankfully, in about 9 hours and 50 minutes, which is just the longest time I've spent in the saddle. Now that's how it went for me on the day. It was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done, and there's some things to learn from, but I was so lucky to have finished in one piece with nothing kind of massively stopping me, no crashes or anything like that. And I was in the 50% who made it in the cutoff time. So it felt like such an achievement. I was super satisfied, just, over the world. It was an insane experience, and I definitely recommend it if you're into cycling and you want a challenge. The views are awesome. Cycling on closed roads is insane. I haven't done that before. It was super good. The support from the fans and the locals is like nothing else I've ever done before. And it was just a great experience and challenge, and I'm so glad I was able to take part. Now, if you could please like my video for all of the suffering, that would be awesome. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I would have liked to have filmed along the way a little bit more and made it a bit more of a vloggy style, but I was just kind of in the moment, enjoying it and suffering at the same time. Now, if you've got any questions, then let me know in the comments below. Or if you did this event, or if you're thinking about doing it, it would be cool to chat. And you know, I love talking about cycling and these sorts of things. So that would be cool. Let me know in the comments below. And lastly, subscribe if you want to see any more fitnessy type stuff from me. And until my next video, have a really good one, and I'll see you then.